the Bible, you have a sense in which God is preparing a place. The Israelites are his people, right? There's a covenant, and you get this sense that they're kind of preparing something. For Christians, the death and the resurrection of Christ is the crucial moment. God comes down onto the earth and then is willing to go all the way into death. What was brought together in Israel is now possible for all people. And so what Jerusalem becomes is something like the spiritual center for the West. If you look at medieval maps, Jerusalem is literally represented at the center of the world.
We're here in Jerusalem at the Via Dolorosa, on the one hand to explore the dynamism of the idea of pilgrimage, but on the other, we're here to explore the nature of a specific kind of pilgrimage, and that is the walking of the stations of the cross. And I'm very interested in that psychologically, because you can think about people's strange desire to walk the stations of the cross as a semi-conscious realization of the notion that you do have to look at and confront everything terrible that might befall you in life.
So we have this place that all these people in Europe recognize as being something they have in common. And so the pilgrimage becomes a way to make the center real for you. You know, if you come from France or from Germany or from wherever, you're able to go there, enact the story, and then you bring that back home, both as a personal transformation of having entered into the story for yourself, but then also as a link, even for your people, for the people you're going back to, a link of memory towards that place that we recognize. The pilgrimage to the holy places, it probably existed even before the 4th century. Christians were probably doing it in secret. People would start in Gethsemane, enter into the city, and then process all the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All right, and so
this is quite the place,
yeah.
Right?
So some of these trees are at least 1,000 years, probably more.
And how extensive is the Garden of Gethsemane?
So it's just this place. Supposedly, this has been a garden for thousands of years. The Garden of Gethsemane is very important because it is in some ways the moment where we see that what Christ is about to do is something that he is willfully doing. He understands what is coming and he decides to go about it anyways. It becomes a model for all of us when we face something difficult, something we think is unsurmountable, some sacrifice we have to make, and we decide to go about it with willful intent.
I've been thinking a lot about that psychologically, you know, the idea of the image of God in the image of Christ. And it's something like the willingness to bear the full weight of life, right? Death and hell.
Yeah.
I don't see how you can open yourself up to life in the fullest extent unless you are willing to do that. Like the degree to which you live properly is proportional to the degree that you're willing to take on that voluntary burden.
Yeah.
Sort of obviously, right? Because the only alternative is to avoid.
And this space is, this is the moment, because Christ, when he's crucified, you know, he falls to the will of the others. But this is the place where he says yes.
In Noah, God is the call to the wise to batten down the hatches in times of crisis. And in Abraham, God is the spirit that calls the overprotected out to the adventure of their life. And in Moses, God is the spirit that calls these enslaved and oppressed toward freedom and chastises the tyrant. The Bible is trying to build a monotheistic vision out of the multiplicity of these spirits. And then it looks to me like when that transforms into the New Testament, that multiplicity of spirit that's given unity is then transferred to the idea that it's the same spirit that makes you confront mortality and vulnerability and hell voluntarily. Yeah, well, that's quite an idea.
So this stone is reputed to be the stone that Christ came to pray, and where he received the solace from an angel after he had accepted the bitter cup. So this is...
What's the solace?
You know how Jacob saw these angels going up and down? And so it's the same representation. It's as if in this accepting of sacrifice, then he opened up that ladder that connects heaven and earth. And then you can understand that at the individual level, but then you can also understand it at let's say, a higher level, which is that if we all gather in the name of that, then the same process, like that same alignment, will also occur
collectively.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think that any process that's uniting psychologically has to be simultaneously uniting socially.
I think so.
And so that's, maybe I don't have this right, but if you think of the kingdom of God as something that's within you and among you, those are both true simultaneously. And there is ambivalence in the gospel text that outlines that about exactly what that means. Does it mean within you? Does it mean among you? It's like, no, it means both.
That's right.
Because that spirit of unity, probably it's part of that fundamental ethic of reciprocity, right? There literally is no difference between treating someone else as if they're you and treating yourself properly. And I think that's also why it's better to give than to receive. If you're generous with people, they're going to be generous with you, and there's a lot more of them than there is of you.
That's right.
So how would that not be a good idea?
Yeah. The story of Christ in this context of what you're saying is a major shift in Western civilization. The notion of sacrifice becomes something like self-sacrifice. This idea of reciprocity, this idea of loving the other as yourself, all these were being prepared, and then they hit the West. Jerusalem becomes the center of the world for all the West, and then it becomes the model on which other things are represented. Like the pilgrimage we're going to do now. We're going to go down the Via Dolorosa, we're going to go all to the Holy Sepulchre. That's a pilgrimage that people in churches all over the West at Easter time would do the same thing, their church and around their church. And so now we're going to leave the garden just like in the story of Christ, and we're going to go towards the Via Dolorosa, which is the ritualized path that people follow in order to participate in the story of Christ, the way that we talked about, how to...
And Via Dolorosa means
the way of suffering.
Right. Perhaps you can think about God in your room, but you could probably do a better job in the Chartres Cathedral, at least arguably, right? It doesn't hurt to have the support of the tradition that you're having to understand at hand. You're not merely a contemplative being. And so it's necessary to do things. It's more necessary to do things than to think them. In fact, the whole purpose of thinking things is so that then you can go do them. Pilgrimage is useful in that regard. It moves you out into the world to see the actuality of the things you're representing, but also to contend with those things in actuality and to make yourself grow. If you knew the story and you walked to each of the stations on the cross, hypothetically that would make the imaginative representation more real.
Exactly.
So one of the things you do in psychotherapy, you can do exposure in imagination. And so you have people sit and then bring a frightening situation to mind. And you want them to make it as real as possible. And the more real they're able to make that in their imagination, the more effective the exposure.
Exactly,
Right, so you can imagine that concretizing it in this way makes it more real.
There's a certain place in the city where Christ is condemned by Pilate and Herod. This is, of course, the moment where there's no turning back. And Christ is now on the road going towards his crucifixion.
This starts with an accusation.
Christ seems to be identifying himself with divinity. He has identified himself as the Son of Man.
Right.
And this Son of Man is an image in the prophets of a divine human figure that is standing next to God. So the religious authorities, of course, they're angry with this, but they don't have the power to put someone in jail because that power was given to the Romans when they took over. So there's a state authority. So they send him to Pilate, but Pilate basically says, I don't find any blame on him. He decides, I'm going to wash my hands. That's become such an important image. It's like, I'm not going to take responsibility for this. It's not my problem. Just do what you want.
And places the destiny of Christ in the hands of what, the mob?
That's exactly what it is. In the condemnation to death is the confluence of all the people that have power at the time. people that are responsible for the Jewish temple and Jewish religion, the king that was put there by the Romans, Herod. And you also have Pilate, who washes his hands and doesn't want to take any responsibility. And so all the powerful kind of participate. There's not one guilty in the crucifixion of Christ. And it becomes an image for us to understand in some ways it's all of us that crucified Christ, right? It's not that we point fingers at one people or another. The best thing you can get out of the story is to understand that it is power itself, or it is an aspect of humanity that crucified Christ. So this arch here, and this place here, is traditionally recognized as the place where he said, here's the man, and then he washed his hands and gave the mob
Behold
what
the
they
man.
wanted. Yes, behold the man.
Yeah, and that's that. Now, Nietzsche wrote a book called Ecce Homo, yes, as well. And that behold the man, that's a very interesting statement because it works in the particular, but it works in the general
That's right.
too, right? Here's what a man is
That's right.
in some real sense. So what a crucified king. Right?
Well, that would
Now,
be
fair
what
enough,
Christianity is manifesting.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the religious authorities at the time thought that that was what the Messiah would be.
Right.
And then that's the surprise, is that this revelation of the joining of the kingly and the suffering one together.
Right.
And that's Christianity.
Yeah, well then, one of the consequences of that politically is that the notion of sovereignty becomes transformed by Christianity out of the law and the prophets into the notion that proper sovereignty is service to the lowest,
Yeah.
right? So that politically speaking is that the political leaders then become only sovereign to the degree that they derive their authority from benefiting the people who are most
That's right.
scattered and oppressed.
Yeah.
Right, and that's part of what we come to realize, to recognize as true sovereignty.
Jesus taking up his cross is an image that Christ himself uses for us. He says, you have to take up your cross. It's the load that we have, right? It is our own suffering. It is our own obstacles. It is everything that is in our way. The best thing you can do is not complain about it, not whine about it because it doesn't change anything, but it is to take it and to move forward with the difficulties that are in front of you.
Why did the Romans use the crucifix as a weapon of tyranny? Well, because it's the instrument of maximal torture. Why did God take the cross on as his particular embodied burden? And the answer to that is something like, well, because it's the worst thing that could possibly happen. And so that's the maximal burden that could be borne. Why did that become a divine symbol? Because that which is most divine will guide you best through the worst possible suffering. It's the place where suffering is experienced and transcended. All that and way more is compacted into the image of the crucifix. It's inexhaustible in its symbolic reference, that image. You can't drain it of its meaning, no matter how many interpretations you pull out of it. It's like a particularly profound piece of music, which can be listened to, 1,000 times.
There are several images of Christ falling. I think these images, which are not in scripture, they're more kind of popular tradition, are really to show the difficulty that he's going through, right? He's not the Superman that is going to carry his cross as if it was nothing. He is suffering. He is actually, falling down under the weight of the situation. Station 5 now is a station that's in the Bible. It is when Simon of Cyrene carries the cross for Christ. And so, Christ...
Why Simon of Cyrene particularly? What does he represent?
I think that he represents the stranger. I think that's what he represents. Because... Wait for this to go.
Batman always shows up.
Yeah, Batman. Simon shows up in Jerusalem. I think Simon represents two aspects of what Christ is doing, which is, you could say, this sounds crazy to say that, because there's something like Christ lets Simon help him carry the cross. Maybe it would be a way to say it if we think of Christ as, as going through this voluntarily, in the sense that there's a way in which Christ makes us participate.
Yeah, well, do you
in
think
his
that's
story.
associated with the principle of subsidiarity?
Yes, definitely.
Right, it's distribution of the responsibility.
So in a way, what Simon is doing is what everybody's doing, right, as they're doing the Via Dolorosa itself. They are accompanying
And,
Christ.
well, I would say also as to the degree that they're walking properly through life.
Yeah.
Because life would be that confrontation with, well, not always the worst, but certainly always with the possibility of the worst. And the more forthright you are in that confrontation, the more you are participating in the redemptive process. I think that's psychologically unassailable, that idea. One of the things you see in psychotherapy is when people start to expose themselves voluntarily to the stumbling blocks they're avoiding, let's say, is they develop their character, and then that has a positive effect on everyone around them. So sometimes disruptive to begin with. Right, so some of it's subsidiarity and some of it's the benevolent stranger. So,
Yeah, you'll see people carrying crosses down this road. I really believe that what this story is showing us is the fact that what Christ is doing is not only for Jerusalem, is not only for the Jewish people, that it is actually something which will carry out into the strange lands. You have this stranger who's not from Israel come and be the one to help Christ carry his cross. So I really do think it becomes an image of what Christianity will ultimately become, this thing that is able to expand and move into all the lands possible. Christianity is something which is meant to kind of reach the ends of the earth. Someone in Korea or someone in America has the possibility of participating in the story of Christ. These are the popular traditions, like these are the folk traditions.
Yeah.
The tradition is that this stone, when Christ fell, at the moment when Simon was going to help him with his cross, that Christ put his hand on this stone.
Right. Another concretization of the story.
Right, and that's for sure, that's what that is, yeah. And like we were saying, the people who walk down, putting their hand there, kissing things, venerating the different places, is that celebration and participation.
Yeah.
And in some ways, what's difficult, I guess, is historians will say, how do you know? How do you know any of these things, where they are? But there's a manner in which things have to be marked. The map has to join with the territory, and that means sometimes pointing. It's like there.
First of all, it's 2,000 years later, so it's not the same place in any case.
Yeah.
And second, this is a good enough place.
That's right, exactly.
Right, it's a good enough stage.
It's close enough, and it's enough to remember and to stop. When we talk about concretization, here's a very good example. So this is a traditional story that is not in scripture as well. It is the story that when Christ came across this road, there was a woman who saw him coming and saw that he was in pain and suffering, and she came and she wiped his face. And then on the veil remained the trace of his face. And this is seen in many traditions as something like the first icon, right? Especially in the Western Church and the Catholic Church, the first icon. But what's important to understand is mostly the concretization part, which is that Christ was a person in the world, right? It's not just an idea, right? Christ was someone who lived and walked the earth. And that's how heaven and earth are connected. What will happen at the beginning of the Christian era is people will struggle to find the balance. They'll try to think that Christ is like an angel or didn't really have a body, or they'll try to deny the fact that he's divine or that he comes from heaven. And so this image, this idea of him leaving his face, his actual image imprinted on the veil, is a testimony to the physicality, to the fact that people saw him, that people touched him, that he was an incarnate being. And then it becomes also the basis for the tradition of Christian images that will ensue in the West.
I had a student once ask me why we tell stories instead of just telling the archetype over and over.
Yeah.
And the reason is that the archetype is so general that it's not particularized enough. And so a story is a place where the archetype meets the particular, and a life is the place where the archetype meets the particular too.
And at least in the Christian story, Christ becomes the ultimate example, right? Where all of heaven was joined with all of earth in one spot. And the image, the icon becomes a representation of that. It's like, this is something that could be held.
So is the woman at this station the female equivalent of the last
Simon of Cyrene?
Simon.
I think so.
Yeah,
because they're
she's
right
offering
next.
care.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but that's interesting because it's right after, and it's like a traditional story that's added to the biblical story.
Right.
So there could be that desire to create that balance.
Space for the feminine. Right,
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, the juxtaposition of the two stories would imply that, right?
Yes, definitely.
There's a reason for narrative ordering.
Oh, you're right. And so Christ encounters the women of Jerusalem weeping for him, And he tells them that they should weep for themselves because he's prophesizing the destruction of the city.
So is that partly his insistence that this is a universal story? He's carrying the cross at the moment, but that doesn't mean they won't be carrying something equivalent later.
It's what the Christian story is suggesting, is that if you kill Christ, Jerusalem falls.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's what's
that's why. If free speech is logos, then that's why free speech is the foundation, the cornerstone of the
There's a surprise,
city.
and there's a surprise in that story. Because when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, they changed the name, they paved over everything, they changed the Temple Mount into a trash heap, they put a pagan temple on Golgotha. It was like, we're going to smash this thing. But because of the story of Christ, there's a restoration that happens, which is that 300 years later, the same Romans that destroyed Jerusalem are going to refound this city as Jerusalem and are going to revive the sacred sites and are going to make it the center of the world.